It's on 5.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. The government said today that its main measure of future economic activity jumped in March for the 7th straight month. And Ray Brady reports the 1.5% increase in the index of leading indicators suggests the recovery now may be really rolling.
Georgia. Suddenly, workers at this GM plant near Atlanta are working overtime. Lots and lots of overtime.
Extra money always comes in handy.
California. Workers at this electronics plant near San Francisco used to work just 4 days a week. Now they're working 5. New York. At this lumber yard in Manhattan, there's a problem. Not enough hours in the workday.
You can't make the guys work later into the night, but we can get them to get up earlier in the morning.
A longer work week is just one indication that business is picking up. Here's another. Prices for copper and other raw materials are up.
Shows that the economy is recovering and that there's a lot of need for cars, for houses, etc.
7 of the 11 leading indicators are up, and economists say that's a reliable forecast of how the economy will be doing 6 to 9 months from now. Not all of today's economic news, though, was on the bright side.
While those with jobs are working longer hours, those without jobs still are having trouble finding them.
The manufacturing sector is lagging. And that's why you have increased unemployment insurance claims.
Economists say it may be autumn before the unemployment picture improves. Nevertheless, with so many signs of revival in the wind, it is not only some economists who foresee a stronger than average recovery.
I'm making more and spending more. But it's good.
Ray Brady, CBS News, New York.
The report that the leading indicators were up was all that was needed to help the stock market rocket to another record. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose more than 6 points to another all-time high, its 20th record close of the year. How real is this recovery, and how long will it last? Those are questions we'll look at later in tonight's broadcast. Harold Washington was sworn in today as Chicago's new mayor and wasted no time, as Bob McNamara reports, in bringing that city face-to-face with its new political and economic realities.
I, Harold Washington, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
It was history passing before Chicago's eyes. Harold Washington taking the oath as the city's first black mayor. But stripping the glitter away from his moment, Washington said the city was in a financial mess, that the schools faced a $200 million deficit. And to his predecessor, Jane Byrne, Washington promised to fire the several hundred political friends she'd given city jobs during the dying days of her administration. And there were more cuts.
Beginning Monday, executive salaries will be cut. Some members of my cabinet will be required to take salaries considerably less than their counterparts are now making. So that there is no confusion, these cuts will begin in the mayor's office. Business as usual will not be accepted by this chief executive of this great city.
Washington said he had never dreamed the flame of leadership would ever come his way. But now that it had, he said, that flame, like the buck, will stop here. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Chicago.
Goodbye from the college, and then hello for you to the world.
Some people save Mr. Goodwrench only for big jobs. Me, I'm a professional myself, so I see him for even simple jobs, like brakes. A good technician doesn't just slapdash a job together. He keeps his eyes open. Look what we spotted. Yeah, trouble. We better fix it now. Could head off big trouble later, and big expense.
Keep that great GM feeling.
Mr. Goodwrench, he's a pro.
With genuine GM parts.
Send Mom something special this Mother's Day. The Tissue Box Bouquet by Teleflora. Your florist can send it anywhere in the country. And Mom will love not only the flowers, but the keepsake they come in. A beautiful brass-plated tissue box. Call your local florist and ask for the Tissue Box Bouquet. With Teleflora, the flowers always come in something as pretty as the flowers themselves.
Yesterday, as we reported, a retired Pentagon intelligence analyst was indicted for selling highly classified information. Today, 75-year-old Waldo Dubberstein was scheduled to be arraigned in court in Alexandria, Virginia. He didn't show up. The rest of what happened now from Robert Shackney, whose reporting first broke the indictment story.
When Waldo Dubberstein failed to appear for his arraignment at federal court this morning, the first assumption was that he had fled to avoid trial on charges of selling intelligence secrets to Libya. Judge Albert Bryan ordered an arrest warrant issued immediately. The prosecutor said Dubberstein had a passport and $200,000 in assets, that he had both the means and the motive for an escape overseas. But shortly after 2 o'clock this afternoon, in an apartment building in Arlington, Virginia, police discovered that Waldo Dubberstein hadn't gone anywhere. He was dead. His body found in a second-floor storage room, a shotgun alongside.
He had been shot once in the head with a shotgun. He was dead. Based upon the angle of the body at the time we discovered it and the evidence present at that site, there was nothing to substantiate anything other than a suicide at this time.
The building where the body was found is the home of Renata Strelau, Dubberstein's longtime companion, also under investigation in the criminal proceedings. She was too distraught to say much.
I've been informed for you to speak to Dr. Dubberstein's lawyer.
After 30 years in the CIA and Pentagon intelligence at the highest levels, Waldo Dubberstein was in disgrace. And at the age of 75 years, he was facing a possible 57-year prison term. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Arlington, Virginia.
There was a wave of bombings in France early today, apparently the work of terrorists agitating for independence for the island of Corsica. No one was injured, but considerable damage was done to buildings in Paris and a Paris suburb, and in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence. Later in the day, in an unrelated development, students demonstrated again in Paris. About 40 of them were taken into custody in clashes with police, and many were injured on both sides. David Andelman was there.
It was the largest in a series of student demonstrations that have marked the past week in the streets of Paris. What the students wanted was talk with the government over its plans to rein in the universities. All they got was a meeting between a few leaders and opposition members of parliament. The French cabinet meeting this morning took no action on the students' basic complaints, but the cabinet enacted tougher measures of economic austerity opposed by much of France. But as the 10,000 or so marchers approached the National Assembly and Foreign Ministry, what they did get was violence. It began with a handful of students anxious to force a confrontation, tearing chunks of paving stones from the sidewalk and streets, hurling them at the heavily armed riot police that ringed the government offices. Suddenly, the police charged, batons raised, laying down a barrage of tear gas. There began a series of small-scale running battles between police and groups of students, rocks flying. The students dispersed, more bitter than ever, pledging more demonstrations next week unless the government begins to listen. David Andelman, CBS News, Paris.
Next week's Chicago Conference of the Nation's Roman Catholic bishops may produce a more spirited nuclear weapons policy debate than expected. A bishops' committee drafting a pastoral letter on the subject has now reversed itself and once again given the letter a tougher anti-nuclear stand. Instead of calling for a curb, the letter would once again call for an outright halt to testing, production, and deployment of nuclear weapons, a position opposed by President Reagan.
All good things take time, huh?
Ever notice how when you really need a flashlight, you can never find one?
What happened to the lights? Nobody move. I'll get a flashlight.
Or when you do find one,
Here it is.
it almost never works. So Black & Decker invented the Spotlighter, the rechargeable light. The Spotlighter stores in its recharger, so it's always bright, always easy to find, always fully charged. The Spotlighter from Black & Decker.
Here's a new breed of steel-belted radios from Kmart that meets today's driving challenges head-on. The long-distance Olympians, made by Uniroyal. Olympians' aggressive European all-season tread takes any weather in stride. Olympians, they go the distance. Now, meet the new Olympian 2 tough steel-belted radios with tough-to-beat introductory prices as low as $37. Olympian 2, quality by Uniroyal, the price by Kmart.
Affirmative action on the job and mandatory school busing were originally ordered to correct hardcore cases of racial discrimination. President Reagan came into office saying, in effect, that they had been overdone. Today, his appointee as head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, William Reynolds, put it more bluntly. In the text of a speech to Amherst College, Reynolds called such policies, quote, a kind of racial spoils system and wrong, morally wrong. Earlier this week, you may recall that a government-appointed panel found that, as a rule, education standards in the nation's schools are unacceptably low. Renee Ferguson offers a look tonight at a North Carolina school that's an exception to the rule and a school of thought that's clicking just right.
If you listen closely, you'll hear it, the sound of learning. The head of the math department at the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics in Durham says he believes this is an example of a perfect school. It is the only tuition-free public boarding school for science and math in the country. The 378 high school juniors and seniors living here are among the state's brightest students. But many admit that in their hometown schools, they were also among the state's most bored students.
I did a lot of sleeping and no homework.
They didn't even know what a computer was at home. I never really had a love for research or a love to go to experiment in the chemistry laboratory. I never had a love for that until I came here, until I realized its implications.
Private companies have pledged $6.5 million to the school, but the state still spends 3 times more on students here than at other public high schools.
You may need to pay that kind of money for some of the very top students, because they're going to make the breakthroughs, they're going to make the discoveries that will lead to new products and provide jobs for the rest of us.
Okay, let's look at problem 6.
Half of the teachers here have PhDs. They are paid $2,500 to $3,000 a year more than most of their counterparts in other North Carolina public schools.
As you notice, the data here kind of...
In many cases, the students end up teaching their teachers. 18-year-old David Long recently demonstrated his new math computer program to IBM executives. He worked on the project after school. 17-year-old Bob Wheathy spends much of his free time in a closet behind the school chemistry lab. He is studying chemicals which give off light as a source of energy. The labs and libraries here are open until 10:30 at night. The learning never stops. It continues long after the lights are out in other schools. Renee Ferguson, CBS News, Durham, North Carolina.
It may be the first case in U.S. history in which a person facing the death penalty didn't attend his own trial. A Tennessee jury today convicted an inmate on the run with his female lawyer of killing 2 black prisoners. William T. Kirk also was found guilty of kidnapping 4 guards in Brushy Mountain Penitentiary before fatally shooting the blacks last year. The jury sentenced Kirk, already serving 65 years for armed robbery, to life in prison. You may recall that the 36-year-old Kirk and his 26-year-old lawyer, Mary P. Evans, fled at gunpoint from a psychologist's office last month. Airports cost a lot of money, including tax dollars. Anywhere there is that much money, there is always the risk of favoritism and or just plain boondoggling. With this in mind, correspondent Steve Kroft has been investigating the big new Southwest Florida jetport.
10 years ago, lots of people began to discover Southwest Florida, one of those unspoiled patches of the Florida dream. 100,000 people have moved here since, and 100,000 more are supposed to be on the way. To help them get here, the city fathers decided to build an airport that would put Fort Myers on the map. They have.
This whole saga has been sort of one of these can you top this type of stories. I've never seen a project like this. I don't think anybody's ever seen a project like this.
It was supposed to cost $30 million, then $70 million, finally $100 million. Now it's supposed to open in 2 weeks, and the price is still going up.
We've had some geotechnical problems in the area in the form of dropouts.
Dropouts?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, areas where the soil would just simply disappear.
The natives call them gator holes. Most people call them sinkholes. They're all over Florida. There have been 3 of them on the main runway at Fort Myers, and the county has had to pour a lot of money in to fix them. 30 years ago, the Air Force said this was not a very good place to build an airport, but nobody listened.
I think maybe that there was just such a rush to, get that airport in here and get it down and get those planes flying in, those people with the money down here as quick as possible, that maybe they didn't go quite as slow as they should have.
The main runway and the taxiways had to be rebuilt. The federal government swears it's safe now. The question is, can anyone afford to use it? To say that the Southwest Florida Regional Jet Board will be the most expensive in the country for the airlines to use simply does not do the facts justice. To pay for the airport, Lee County will have to charge the airlines 5 times the going rate for terminal space and landing fees. The airlines say it will cost them $18 a passenger to use the airport. TWA has already pulled out, others are nervous, and some county commissioners are worried about defaulting on $93 million in bonds.
It is a distinct possibility that has to be considered.
The best thing they could do would be to abort right now and say they'd made a big mistake and cut their losses and sell the land back to the developers and sell the terminal for a shopping center.
People here have their fingers crossed that Fort Myers will keep growing, that the runway won't open up and swallow a plane load of tourists, and that someone will figure out how to pay for this thing. It's put Southwest Florida on the map. The question is, will people have to drive to get here? Steve Kroft, CBS News, Fort Myers.
The next time you feel like this. Indigestion. Take this, Pepto Bismol. There's nothing quite like Pepto Bismol. It coats, soothes, relieves. So when you feel like this.
Indigestion.
Take this, Pepto Bismol. It coats, soothes, relieves.
When it comes to lawnmowers, there are some people who'll pass up a John Deere for a bargain brand. Sure, they'll save a little money, but they won't have John Deere features like deep die-cast aluminum decks and single lever height adjustment. But until the day their mower needs service, they won't know they're missing the most important feature of all, a John Deere dealer. Nothing runs like a Deere.
President Reagan's well-planned political trip to Houston, Texas took an unexpected turn shortly after his arrival and, in fact, came to a full stop. The presidential motorcade halted after 2 Houston police officers who were part of the motorcycle escort collided. The president got out of his limousine and had the presence of mind to pick up a policeman's revolver on the ground and hand it over to a Secret Service agent for safekeeping. The president then went on to offer aid and comfort to one of the injured motorcycle officers. Later on, Mr. Reagan kept his appointment to visit a drug clinic and prepared for tonight's fundraiser for Republican Senator John Tower's re-election bid. Today's Index of Leading Indicators report is just the latest sign indicating an end to the recession. Now the main questions are, how strong will this recovery be, and for how long?
The American worker, the former worker, the family, all people who have suffered and survived America's worst recession since World War II. A recession that slowed the economy to a crawl and put 3.5 million men and women out of work since July '81, raising the number of the unemployed to 11.5 million people. It is a recession, we are told, that is finally ending.
It's coming along very nicely. We've seen employment turn up. We've seen industrial production turn up. Sales are beginning to increase. In general, it's a broad recovery.
It is almost unarguable. Since late last year, housing has come on strong. That's the traditional indication that things are turning around. The automobile industry has shown new strength. Consumers are beginning to spend more, though not convinced yet that the worst is over. Business investment is still lagging, but with the expectation that this important sector also will improve by summer. Those are the dynamics of recovery. Still, there remains strong disagreement over the policies that sparked this recovery, the price Americans are still paying, and what the future may hold.
The seeds of the recession were here when we arrived, and the recession itself came on within 4 or 5 months after we took office. So we could hardly, no matter how good we were, have created that much havoc in 3 or 4 months.
As a Democrat, don't you have to give President Reagan credit, and a lot of credit, for fighting through double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, getting the country to take the tough medicine, and then starting back on a recovery?
Well, first of all, I hope that we are on a
road to recovery, but the fact is that this administration has given us the worst recession since World War II and the most sluggish response. All you have to do is ask any businessman or woman in this country about the orders. They're not getting it. There's been some response in automobiles and also in housing, but there are still millions of men and women who are unemployed.
Would it be fair, Senator, to say that your major complaint, major disagreement with the Reagan economic policy is that it's been unfair?
Basically unfair, inequitable, and unjust.
The Republicans point to the recent small drop in unemployment.
People are going back to work because President Reagan didn't go for the quick fix.
Even if it stays at or about what it is now, let's say 10% or even goes to 9.6% of unemployment, by recent standards, that's still a staggering unemployment. And is that your idea of putting Americans back to work?
No, that is much too high. I think a lot of that unemployment is structural. Structural meaning it's permanent, as opposed to cyclical, in which people go back to work as soon as the recovery gets underway. This means that a lot of jobs that once were are not going to be there anymore. And we have to try to figure out some way to handle that problem.
For the unemployed, economic war is hell. But for the 90% of the American workforce that is working, the recovery, the low inflation, is good news. But good news threatened by an enemy, all sides agree could choke recovery. Budget deficits. Deficits growing so fast that unless the pattern changes, they will reach a stunning $300 billion level by 1988. That could be an economic mushroom cloud.
Now, when the federal budget is in deficit, it means that the federal government is competing for scarce funds in the capital markets. And that competition will tend to raise interest rates, that is, the price of credit. When interest rates rise, businesses and consumers tend to spend less, and this will retard the growth of the economy.
The debate in Washington over where to cut the budget, hard decisions about defense spending and social programs such as Medicare, is crucial to the future of America's economic health. Most agree that spending cuts alone are not enough, that there must be new taxes. For the workers, former workers, and families of America, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but still a long, tough road out into the sunshine.
These Bridgestone Super Filler Steel Belted radials are brand new. These only have 50% of the original tread. Let's go! We'll prove both cars will do the same thing. Bridgestone Super Filler radials have a hard rubber insert near the rim for a flexible sidewall, and virtually new tire traction even with half the tread gone. Bridgestone traction that lasts and lasts. You can feel it when you drive and drive. Look for your nearest Bridgestone dealer in the yellow pages.
We're coming in. Bye. Mr. Lawrence loved the boat. He gave me the order.
Oh, way to go, partner. Let's have some coffee.
Only half a cup.
I thought you liked fresh brewed coffee.
I love it. It's the caffeine.
Look.
Brim decaffeinated coffee? Well, if it tastes this rich, fill it to the rim.
With Brim.
Fill your cup to the rim with the richness of Brim.
I want to tell you about Stern's Miracle Grow plant food because I know it works. Take tomatoes. I've been growing tomatoes for over 30 years, and let me tell you, you will never grow more or bigger tomatoes than with Miracle Grow. In fact, years of testing at a major university have proven that Miracle Grow not only produces more tomatoes, but pounds and pounds more than other types of plant food. Miracle Grow is truly amazing, and nothing could get me to say that if it wasn't true.
8 California sea lions, all separated from their mothers by this winter's violent storms, today will return to the ocean from marine land near Los Angeles. The 8 are the first of 200 sea animals to be released after being nursed back to health. One orphan of the storm, knowing it's a jungle out there, didn't want to leave. During their captivity, the sea lions had to be taught to compete for food. It must have worked. They averaged about 30 pounds each when they were saved and weighed up to 120 pounds each today. How about a class act in Maryland that's drawing criticism from some in the class of '83? Susan Spencer looks into what happens when Bachelor of Art meets state-of-the-art for graduation day.
The Anne Arundel Community College Chorus is practicing its heart out for the big day. teachers are pounding in those last few facts before graduation. Students can't wait to get into their black robes and get that diploma.
And who will the college's exalted commencement speaker be this year? Somebody said something about Robert Redford. It turned out that wasn't quite right.
Good afternoon, students, faculty, family.
Actually, it was Robot Redford, here practicing his platitudes at our request.
You'll be leaving this college and going out into a brand new world.
Why not a robot, college officials said. Technology will dominate the future, and what better way to show students what lies ahead? Robot Redford's inventor, who will deliver the speech through his offspring, thinks it will be a big hit.
Hopefully, if they didn't like him in the beginning, when he gets there and he talks to them, I think when they leave, they'll have a different opinion of him.
But back on the normally placid Anne Arundel campus, there is big trouble.
It smacks of being more a college prank than the serious and idealistic event that a commencement should be.
Students, by and large, think the robot's a fine idea.
Well, I think in our technological age, it's about time.
But even some of the students are peeved.
Well, it's rather impersonal. I mean, what do? Go up and say hello to a box?
I think that contradicts the philosophy of, art.
If I came here every day and studied like I should do and get the good grades, I think I should be in the commencement ceremony and not some stupid robot.
But at least the Dean of Students says no one ever will forget who spoke at this commencement.
We will have a solemn ceremony. However, it will be futuristic, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
Back in California, Robot Redford seems unfazed by the controversy. He's working on the third draft of his speech.
Your generation is embarking on the most advanced changes this country has ever seen.
Susan Spencer, CBS News, Anne Arundel County, Maryland.
And that's the CBS Evening News for this Friday. Bill Curtis will be here tomorrow. Dan Rather reporting from New York. Thank you for joining us. Have a good weekend.
Just look at that drive. The Honda 21-inch lawnmower is showing us tremendous power up the tee. All right, let's go to Barry Woods in the rough.
Well, I'm out here with the Honda Pro model, and it is just eating up this tall, wet grass. We got a real winner here. Alice, you up on the green?
Yes, Barry, with Honda's 17-inch lightweight. Oh, look at it rim the cup.
The Honda lawnmowers. If you're not using one, you've got a big handicap.
Your father gave it to you for your 5th birthday. Now it's your turn to pass it on. Any spray paint could make it red again, but Rustoleum, with an average of 50% more protective ingredients than its nearest competitor, can do more. Its protective formula not only prevents rust, but gives metal better protection against chipping and peeling. So if what you're painting isn't ordinary, why should your paint be? Rustoleum, any metal worth painting is worth protecting.
I want you to meet something new for your arthritis pain and your aspirin-sensitive stomach. Maximum Strength Ecotrin, safety-coated aspirin. Its orange safety coating works so well. Millions of you can take even maximum strength aspirin without all aspirin stomach upset. It's not the aspirin substitute, it's aspirin for minor pain relief. Safety-coated to protect your stomach. Now, if your doctor says aspirin, take it. But make it new Maximum Strength Ecotrin. It's safety-coated, it's orange.
Tomorrow, see WBA Junior Lightweight Champion Roger Mayweather battle Jorge Alvarado, plus the World Cup Diving Championships and Mixed Pairs Gymnastics on CBS Sports Saturday.
This is CBS.
In our news tonight, officials say yesterday's seizing of a huge farm that may have drug smuggling connections could be just the beginning. And Tennessee's unemployment rate takes a sizable dip. Details on these stories and a lot more coming up next on Eyewitness News.